Welcome to the All Things Nintendo podcast. I'm Brian Shea, and this is a weekly podcast to discuss all the biggest news and games from the world of Nintendo. This week, it's just going to be me, because there hasn't been a whole lot going on in the world of Nintendo, so we're going to do an ATN Inbox episode for the first time in a while. So I put out a call for questions in August, but things have been so busy to this point that I haven't really had a chance to really spend much time answering listener questions, so we're going to play a bit of catch-up throughout this show. Just looking at the amount of questions, there's likely no way I'm going to be able to get to all of them this episode, but I'm definitely going to make a concerted effort to at least make a dent. And, my sincerest apologies to everyone who asked me questions nearly 2 months ago. But now that we finally have a down week, we're going to get into it a little bit. But before we do that, there were a couple things I wanted to I thought they bared mentioning in the world of Nintendo, the news segment. Nothing that we need to spend a ton of time on, but I do wanted to mention that, we got an update to the Nintendo Switch Online GBA library, and it's 2 F-Zero games. So we have F-Zero GP Legend and F-Zero Climax. And, from what I understand, F-Zero Climax has actually never made it to the West. So that's pretty interesting. I'm hearing a lot of people also say that it is easily the worst F-Zero game to ever come out. But hey, it's cool to have these things available. They are both arriving on Nintendo Switch Online on October 11th. I got that news from NintendoLife.com. And I also wanted to call out, I've mentioned a few times the Sonic X Shadow Generations Collector's Edition, which is just absolutely incredible. Pre-orders of that end early next week. So if you're interested in that, go pre-order that. That Sonic and Shadow statue where they're standing on top of a Dreamcast is just unbelievable. But it's $250. So it's one of those where it's like, oh man, that would hurt to do that, especially when I'm not currently employed full time. Speaking of which, their limited run games it really feels like they're specifically targeting me right now. They put out this Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles Shredder's Revenge Ultimate Edition, and I don't know how much this is going to be, because as of recording, it's not up on the site. They only have the other editions, which include a collection of all the soundtracks on vinyl. But the Ultimate Edition Collector's Edition, I guess you can pre-order it starting the day that I'm recording this, October 3rd, all the way through November 3rd. And it has the game with a deluxe gatefold box, 3-disc soundtrack. It's on CD, not on vinyl, which would be the big thing for me. I don't have CDs anymore. I do have a vinyl collection though, so I would love that if it did come with the vinyls. Lithograph set, which looks like a bunch of the different official arts that they've put out for the game and the DLC. And then a set of 4 exclusive game-inspired Playmates Toys TMNT figures. And these look really cool. This isn't hitting me in the way that the Sonic X Shadow Generations Collector's Edition does, but it is it's just these were 2 of my favorite things on the planet growing up, and things that I'm still absolutely in love with in adulthood. So to have these be the 2 that Limited Run is doing right now during a time when I'm not trying to spend a ton of money is it's funny. It's funny timing, very inopportune, but I've collected a lot of stuff, and the Sonic X Shadow Generations, where they're standing on the Dreamcast, is the only one that's oh, that would be nice to have. But you know what? I just wanted to highlight that. I would say that if you look up your alley, there's probably a lot worse collector's editions that you could spend your money on, especially since Sonic X Shadow Generations looks like it's going to be really awesome. TMNT Shredder's Revenge we know is awesome. So go check those out. Limited Run Games is doing some phenomenal work. Are they the ones that are also doing the Metaphor Refantazio Collector's Edition? It does not appear as though they are. It looks like this is a widespread Collector's Edition. So yeah, that hold on. No, the collector's edition appears to be available everywhere. So, yeah, even so, that's another really good looking collector's edition that I think that people who are fans of the game would not regret buying. So go check those out. They're available. At least the Sonic X Shadow Generation is available for a few more days, and the TMNT Shredder's Revenge Ultimate Edition is available for until the early days of November. So let's get into some of these questions. Let's see here. I have a document sitting on my desktop right here. We will start off with Jason Thompson via Patreon. Jason asks, with how amazing the games were in the launch window for the Switch, what do you think Nintendo will have to do to make the launch of the Switch successor just as good, if not better, than the Switch? I mean, the Switch had Breath of the Wild and Mario Kart 8 Deluxe within the first few months, not to mention Super Mario Odyssey later that year to keep the momentum going, and that's just first party. Do you think they will need big hitters like that, or do you think that things like backwards compatibility and a revamped Nintendo Switch Online can make up for a more lackluster opening lineup? All right, so I have made my thoughts pretty clear on like a couple of the games that I think that we're going to get in the early stages of the Switch. I honestly think it would be a good move in this first year and realistic. I think the launch game is going to be a 3D Mario game, whether that's Mario Odyssey 2, as I've said, would be my most likely pick, or if it's just an all new 3D Mario game. I think that you mentioned that Mario Odyssey came out in 2017. We've since then gotten both a 2D, or I guess two 2D Zelda games, including if you want to count the Link's Awakening remake, and a second 3D Zelda game since 2017. Like, that is absurd. So a 3D Mario game feels like it's inevitable for 2025, but we could be still waiting maybe the holiday season like they did with Odyssey, but they're not going to have a 3D Zelda game. I mean, I'd be shocked if they had a 3D Zelda game unless it's like the Ocarina of Time remake that we've been speculating about. As far as other games, so I'm predicting at least year one, more probably launch would be a 3D Mario. I think it's time we get a new Mario Kart game. I really do think it's time we get a new Mario Kart game. Um, it's a cash cow for a reason. It's arguably at this point Mario's most Nintendo's most popular series. Obviously, Zelda and Mario are going to be like the flagship franchises, but look at how well Mario Kart 8 Deluxe has done in terms of sales. It has blown away everything else. The only thing that kind of kept pace with it for a while, but it has trailed off a little bit, is Animal Crossing. And that is my answer for what the third game that I'm going to say would make sense for this launch window or launch year would be a new Animal Crossing game. Animal Crossing New Horizons blew up the world when it came out in 2020, and it would make sense. It'll be 5 years by the time the Switch launches since an Animal Crossing game, and they know that they're sitting on a cash cow with that. So I don't know if maybe they want to space out Mario Kart and Animal Crossing since that was their two biggest sellers on Switch. But that would be a good way to like just come screaming out of the gate with Switch 2 would be 3D Mario at launch, maybe an Animal Crossing game. Like say it launches in the early spring months, like March, April, maybe May. Come out screaming with a Mario game, then go to an Animal Crossing game over the summer, and then your holiday tentpole game is a Mario Kart game. That's a great year for Nintendo if they can pull it off. Obviously, Nintendo has just a million IPs that they can pull from, but you got to think. Originally, I was predicting we were going to get maybe a Donkey Kong game, but we are getting Donkey Kong Country Returns for Switch early next year, so I think that kind of dashes it away. What else remains? I mean, maybe an F-Zero game. I just talked about how we're getting F-Zero on Switch Online through the Game Boy Advance catalog. I I think that maybe they might be considering putting out a new F-Zero game. But I mean, if they're putting out a Mario Kart game, I think that they would probably do F-Zero the next year, or vice versa. If they did an F-Zero game in 2025, maybe a Mario Kart game follows the following year. But we're getting to a point where we just celebrated the 10-year anniversary of the original Mario Kart 8. And the Mario Kart 8 Deluxe obviously was a much better version of that game and added a ton of content from like past games. But we are over 10 years since the last all new Mario Kart game. We are due. And I don't know how you top it. It's got that Super Smash Brothers Ultimate syndrome where it's like this is already the, I mean, for lack of a better word, ultimate version of this game. Where does it even go from there? And that's how I feel about Smash Ultimate. That's how I feel about Mario Kart 8 Deluxe since they did the DLC, the Booster Course Pass. Where does that franchise even go from there? And it's unless they do like kind of like a Nintendo wide kart racing game that has more characters, because we already have Link, we already have the Splatoon Inklings, we already have Animal Crossing characters in Mario Kart 8 Deluxe. But you know what? Maybe they expand it out. Maybe it reaches other IP outside of Nintendo, similar to how Smash Brothers eventually did. Like, I don't know where Mario Kart goes from here, but Nintendo is going to be the company that figures it out if anybody's going to figure it out. And same thing for Smash Brothers. You may have seen this on Twitter, but Masahiro Sakurai is finishing up his YouTube show that he's been doing. Maybe there is a reason for that. I don't have any inside information, but like, what if he is kind of stepping away from that to make time for something else, like ramping up back to making a Smash Brothers game? Uh, it's interesting to kind of kick around that idea. Another sleeper that might be a year one. Speaking of Sakurai, is Kirby. Why not have a new Kirby game? Like we got Return to Dreamland Deluxe recently. We got Kirby and the Forgotten Land, which is a 3D game. That was a couple years ago now. Was that 2021 or 2022? Either way, it'll have been at least 3 years since that game came out by this time next year. So I could see that being a holiday release as well. But you know, we've seen a lot of more experimental takes on some of the franchises that we love this year. You know, we got Princess Peach Showtime, which was Peach's first starring role in a long time in an actual like story based game. We just got Zelda Echoes of Wisdom, which is the first time Zelda is the main character of a mainline Zelda game. So I think that Nintendo is allowing some of its not B tier studios, but like not the mainline developer to experiment with some games in the tail end of the Switch's life, while the kind of the top tier mainline development teams are making their new experiences for the Switch 2. I think that would make a lot of sense for this kind of transition period. And you know, that's so let's see, what did I say? I said 3D Mario, I said Animal Crossing, Mario Kart / F-Zero, one of those two, and a Kirby game. I think that would be a great year. And obviously, other stuff's smattered in. They'll have plenty of third party partnerships, especially if it's a more powerful version of the Switch. A lot of developers have taken note of how amazing and popular the Switch 1 was. So I think that Nintendo, as long as they don't deviate too far from that, it's going to be you know, an easy sell for third parties to kind of fill in the blanks where Nintendo does not have a game coming on their platform. So yeah, that's my prediction for what we might get year one for Switch 2. But as I always say, trying to predict Nintendo is a fool's errand. I mentioned this game on this first answer, so I guess that segues perfectly into Megan S's question over on Patreon. She says, "Were you big on Animal Crossing New Horizons? I don't recall you mention it on the show much. Also, what's 3 games that you wish / hope will be created for the Switch's successor, realistic or not? I look forward to tuning into the show. I love Q&As." Thank you. I love doing Q&As, and like I said, it's been a very busy stretch here, and whether it's anniversaries or news that's hitting, it's just been kind of hard to sneak in a Q&A episode. So now that we've had a little chance to breathe here, I'm happy to do a Q&A episode here. Let's see. Was I big on Animal Crossing New Horizons? Yes, I think I put over 100 hours. I mean, people might be able to fact check me on that with I on the community Discord. I did throw my friend code in there so people can see my play history. I at least put tens of hours into that game, if not over 100 hours. It was one, as it was with most people, a big early era of the pandemic game for me. When everything was kind of locked down, Animal Crossing New Horizons was a comfort thing that I could play. I could, aspire to be as intricate as Game Informer's former production director Margaret Andrews, and former All Things Nintendo guest. She did kind of like the manipulation of the clock thing, but she did it in such a way that I visited her island very early on, and it was just absurd. There were like walls of waterfalls, and just like the way she terraformed that island, it made me realize, one, that I wanted to do better with my island, but two, maybe I should just give up because it's never going to be as good as hers. And sure enough, mine never reached anywhere near like sniffing her island, but it was still really cool to see like what she did with the tools that Nintendo provided. I loved making it all the way up. I fully upgraded my house. I got my island to the point of like kind of like I rolled credits on it. I got the end game state of Animal Crossing New Horizons. So I did play it all the way through and did all that. But like after that, I didn't really do a whole lot. I thought that as with many Nintendo games, the online infrastructure is kind of frustrating with how they do that. You know, you just had to kind of jump through so many hoops. It was annoying in that way, but I'm glad that Nintendo is experimenting with more online gameplay because it's woefully behind in that area, and to continue to not try to do stuff like I mentioned, like Super Mario 3D Land or 3D World finally added online play to this game that should have had it when it launched on Wii U back in what, 2012, 2013. I think it was actually 2013 or 2014. I forget when Mario 3D World originally launched on Wii U. But I think that Animal Crossing New Horizon it was a huge phenomenon when it came out, and I was not immune to that. I played the crap out of that. I know that it came out around the same time as Doom Eternal, and everybody was kind of fixated on Animal Crossing, myself included. So yeah, I was huge on Animal Crossing. I just faded completely out of it by the time that this show started in fall of 2021, which is wild to think that I've been doing this for over 3 years now. Um, but I guess it's been around 3 years. I think it was like mid to late October. So yeah, we're coming up on the 3 year anniversary of this show, which is kind of crazy. What else did you ask, Megan? What's 3 games that you wish slash hope that'll be created for the Switch's successor, realistic or not? I mean, I gave what I thought were realistic, so let's do the pie in the sky things here. A new Donkey Kong Country game. I know we have Retro Studios working on Metroid Prime 4, and they're the ones who did the Donkey Kong Country Returns games. What if they gave it to Playtonic, the developers that did the ukulele games? And also, they were a lot of the developers who were behind the original Donkey Kong Country games. I think that would be a phenomenal way to bring those developers uh, back into that franchise. But let's see. So Donkey Kong Country developed by Playtonic, that's one of them, and I'm talking like full on 2D. I wouldn't hate having a 3D game be kind of the next thing that Donkey Kong does, because really the only 3D Donkey Kong game that we've gotten has been Donkey Kong 64. And I know that's not the most highly played game because of its expansion pack requirement. And it's also, not particularly well liked. Let's see. So that's one. A Donkey Kong game of some sort. I would lean towards Donkey Kong Country, developed by Playtonic. Maybe more. I mean, we already got Cadence of Hyrule. but maybe something along the lines of that for a Mario game, like a rhythm based Mario game that isn't Dance Dance Revolution Mario mix. Um, yeah, so I would love to see like maybe the Cadence of Hyrule or something for the Mario franchise, because as much as I love Zelda music, Mario is right up there in terms of franchises with fantastic music. Or maybe just do a Nintendo wide one. I mean, that would be kind of cool to have like all these different characters able to kind of traverse the world. But it worked so well with the Zelda franchise. What if, oh man, what about a Sonic rhythm based game? Something to do with the Sonic music, and you can just venture through the different eras. Something music based for sure. And I mean, yeah, Rhythm Heaven would be cool to have a revival, but I want something that like has them coming out swinging. I want something where they are able to I want something that they can capitalize on all the amazing music that we hear constantly. I mean, we have Theater Rhythm for Final Fantasy. It's not my favorite rhythm game. Like the mechanics just don't really resonate with me too well, but something with the Sonic franchise, something with the Mario franchise, maybe even something else with the Zelda franchise, that would be great. And I'd also love to see, let's see, what's something kind of really out there. I mean, I could just say like, Mario 1 or 2, but I feel like that's kind of a boring answer. Um or like maybe a 3DS port, like give us a Link Between Worlds, or I can just say like, continue riding this ship into the rocks and say the Wii U remasters of Wind Waker and Twilight Princess. But let's see, so we've got Donkey Kong of some sort. We've got a rhythm game of Mario, Sonic, or just Nintendo in general. What about? I mean, here I'll just throw it out there. Let's do a Final Fantasy X remake, similar to the Final Fantasy VII remake. I would be all about that. It probably wouldn't come to Switch 2, so I'll just go with the Ocarina of Time remake. There we go. I think that is maybe the most realistic of the ones that I have set out in this, because it's actually been hinted, and like I've actually told AG Aonuma they should do it. But it's I think that would be an awesome stopgap between the wide open style of gameplay of Breath of the Wild and Tears of the Kingdom. Yeah, here's why I think that Ocarina of Time remake would be awesome. So we are coming off of Breath of the Wild and Tears of the Kingdom, and those games are so wide open and so enabling of creativity. It kind of makes it difficult to understand how we could go back to the traditional style of Zelda. And I think that if they released a new game kind of in the style like Skyward Sword, I think that people who got into the series through Breath of the Wild and Tears of the Kingdom might be taken aback by the I mean, it's not linear in the sense of like, a 2D Mario game is linear, but it's linear in the sense of like you're supposed to go to this dungeon, then you're supposed to go to this dungeon. I think if they released a more linear, less open Zelda game that's completely new, people who got into the series through Breath of the Wild and Tears of the Kingdom would be taken aback. However, they could introduce this newer generation of Zelda fans to that style through a remake of maybe the most beloved classic Zelda game, which is The Legend of Zelda Ocarina of Time. If they do that, it'll reintroduce players to that style of gameplay, and they'll be used to it. And then when they decide to finally make a more traditional Zelda game in that 3D style, people will be acclimated to it. So I think that's the most realistic answer for this. But I also think it's the one that makes the most sense for the Zelda franchise at this point. So yeah, those are my answers. Donkey Kong of some sort, preferably Donkey Kong Country. Um, Rhythm game starring either Mario, Sonic, or Nintendo wide, and Zelda Ocarina of Time modern remake, like full remake. I'm not talking about the 3DS game anymore at this point. I feel like that opportunity has come and gone. If they were going to do it, they would have done it on Switch. But that's also a good stopgap for if they want to take some time and develop the next 3D Zelda game they can fill the void with this remake that they can, not have the mainline Zelda game or mainline Zelda team work on, and they can give it to one of these support studios to do with, maybe Eiji Aonuma overseeing it. So I think that makes a lot of sense for them. So I know, Megan, I veered off course on your answer. Apologies. But yeah, that's what I do. I go on tangents, I guess. There was another one here that I wanted to find. Okay, this comes from Joseph Jury on Patreon. I just lost it. So there we go. Joseph Jury on Patreon. Joseph says, is there anything that would be a deal breaker for you with the successor to the Nintendo Switch? For example, if it had no backwards compatibility with software or Joy-Cons, or if it was a strict handheld without the Switch ability to be a home console, would anything make you reconsider purchasing the new console or delay your purchase in any way? Oh man, I mean, backwards compatibility is a big one for me. I need Switch 2 to be backwards compatible. I have spent so much time, so much money on my Switch 1 library, building it up. This is the place that I prefer to buy a lot of my games. I mean, some of the third-party games like Mortal Kombat 1 and I'm probably not going to play Sonic X Shadow Generations on my Switch because I didn't play Sonic Frontiers on my Switch, even though I have it. I just prefer to play the smoother running game. But backwards compatibility. If my Switch 2 can't play these hundreds of Switch 1 games that I already own digitally, not even like, okay, well, the cartridge is different, the cartridge slot is different, so it can't fit in there. If I can't play digital games, that is going to be a huge blow to my enthusiasm to this console. And I don't think that's going to be the case because, as the president of Nintendo mentioned in an investor call, I brought this up a few times, but he said, think of it as Switch Next model, which tells me that they're not going to be reinventing the wheel with this, which I'm perfectly fine with. I think the Switch is an outdated but extremely incredible piece of technology. I still play mine to this day, even though it's definitely on its last legs. I still bring it with me over my Steam Deck even. It's just the library that it has is incredible. They've spent so much time bringing over Wii U games, bringing over some Wii games, bringing over GameCube games. They have ported so much of the past to Switch. It would be a slap in the face if they made you buy these games all over again. I would be very upset. I mean, it's one thing if they're like, okay, we can play the games as they played on Switch, or you can upgrade to the Switch 2 version of like Breath of the Wild for a $10 upgrade fee or something, and that would make it so it runs at like 60 FPS or 4K resolution, whatever it ends up being. I think that would be not great, but it would be something that I could swallow, right? It would be a pill that I can swallow. And backwards compatibility is, a 90% must for me. Like I will still be excited for a new Nintendo console because new Nintendo software. That is just the fact of the matter. But not being able to play my older games, and that would mean that like if I want to bring, you know, Balatro and Vampire Survivors and Tears of the Kingdom and all these games that I play so much on my flights, if I wanted to bring those, I would have to bring both my Switch 1 and my Switch 2. No, I'm not going to do that. So that would be extremely frustrating if backwards compatibility, but I truly believe that the Switch 2 is going to be backwards compatible. If it's not backwards compatible with Joy-Cons, I'd be okay with that. I mean, it would be nice if I could use my Joy-Cons, but I've so rarely used my Joy-Cons anyway. I'd be more upset if I couldn't use my Pro controller. And that I think is more likely than lack of backwards compatibility because, what if they add new functionality? What if they add new buttons that are not on the Pro controller now? I mean, maybe they can make it so the Pro controller is like, functional, but you can't use new features. Like, I think that like, some of the backwards compatible PS4 games on PS5, you can use your PS4 controller, I believe, but like you don't get a lot of like the new functionality on it. So if they did something like that with the Switch Pro controllers, I'd be fine with that. I'd be more upset though if the Pro controllers were not backwards compatible than I would be if the Joy Cons were not backwards compatible. Joseph Jury's other scenario here: if it was a strict handheld without the Switch ability to also be a home console, ooh, that would be a rough one. That would be one that I would not as upset about lack of backwards compatibility, but I would. It would be absurd if they didn't make it based on the success of the Switch One. I could not imagine Nintendo not doing a Switch style system at this point. But yeah, backwards compatibility would be the biggest deal breaker. Lack of Switch ability would be the second, and then Joy Cons being backwards, not being backwards compatible, would be the third of these situations you posited here. Um, any other deal breakers? Like maybe if it was prohibitively expensive, like we're seeing with like the PS5 Pro. But even then, I could see myself like being like, okay, well, this is the one that I will splurge on because I love Nintendo so much, and I want to continue playing, the latest Zelda game or the latest Mario games. Like, I cannot imagine a scenario where a new Zelda game or a new Mario game comes out and I'm not like frothing at the mouth to play it. So I think that if there was any system that like if it was going to be, and I don't want this to be the case, but if there was any system where it was going to be like $700 and I'm like, okay, fine, I'll do it without like much thought, it would be the next Nintendo console. But thankfully, Nintendo has typically been a a very pricing conscious company, especially when compared to like PlayStation. Maybe if they were like, hey, it's physical only, that would be something that I would be kind of not about. I have been digital, especially with handheld devices, for over a decade at this point. I mean, it was probably since 2016 I've been primarily digital for even home consoles. I just think the convenience is so much better, and I have no interest in buying physical at this point. It just takes up so much space. The only thing that I really care about in the realm of physical is like collector's editions. I think those are pretty awesome, like as I mentioned at the top of the show. Yeah, so maybe that would be it. That would be like the thing that would really deter me, is if it's like, okay, well, this new system is physical only, which could you imagine? Like that would be the weirdest move. I can't imagine any scenario why any developer or platform holder would do that. But thank you, Joseph Jury, for that question. Before we continue, now's as good a time as any to remind you that you can support All Things Nintendo through several different methods, but the best way is through the Patreon page, which offers bonuses like early and ad-free episodes, access to the community Discord, priority for Q&A episodes just like this one, and if you come in at the $10 level, you get an entire second weekly podcast called All Things Gamers. You can also support the show through our merch shop on tpublic.com, and you can find my YouTube channel, which is at Brian P. Shea. All right, so continuing on here, Avery Moore on Patreon asks, what was the last game you 100%ed on Switch? P.S. Thanks for all the work you do. Absolutely love listening to ATN every week. Thank you so much, Avery. The last game I 100%ed on Switch, Super Mario Brothers Wonder. I 100% of that before the game even came out, and I did a guide for it. It was on Game Informer. It was one of the most time intensive things that I did at Game Informer, and then it ended up not being as in demand as I had hoped it would be. I was hoping that people would be searching for like, you know, how to find all the hidden coins in Super Mario Brothers Wonder, and turns out they weren't. Turns out it was pretty easy, and I was, pretty disappointed that I spent all that time doing that. But I put out my 100% guide for Mario Wonder, and I was proud of the work. I did a lot of screenshotting. I did a lot of other stuff. So I did that as part of my job. Before that, there's another question here. Let me find it here. Okay, so Cody Gibson, this kind of leads into this as well. Cody Gibson via Patreon. What was the last game you played to completion through Nintendo Switch Online service? For me, it was the original Shining Force earlier this year. So that dovetails perfectly with my other answer. If you don't want to count one that I did for work, which was Super Mario Brothers Wonder that I 100%ed, it was Majora's Mask. I 100%ed that on, I mean, I guess maybe not 100% since I didn't get all the heart pieces, but I did get all the masks, including the Fierce Deity mask. And, did play the easy version of the Majora boss battle. I don't know. I think that counts as 100%. Does that count as 100%? Like, I didn't get the heart pieces, so I guess technically not. The heart containers. I just didn't care too much about the heart containers. And I kind of consider that 100%ing it within reason because heart containers and collectibles in that way are a little absurd, especially in a game like Majora's Mask. But even Cody Gibson here is asking about played to completion. It might be Majora's Mask. But Avery, that also would be my second to last answer. But Mario Wonder is the real answer for 100%. But Cody Gibson, it's probably Majora's Mask. I don't think I have played through any other classic games all the way to completion. I fire up Nintendo Switch Online all the time. I just set off on a mission before before I got inundated with games that are coming out in this time frame. Upcoming episodes, I'll be talking about things like Metaphor Refantazio, not on all things Nintendo, on all things gamers. I'll be talking about like Metaphor Refantazio, Dragon Ball Sparking Zero, tons of games coming out on the near term. So I kind of put this on hold, but I did fire up the Game Boy Advance library and I started my first ever playthrough of Legend of Zelda Minish Cap. So that is hopefully the next one that I will play through to completion. But we'll see. We'll see how it goes. So Michael Anderson via Patreon, do you think Nintendo should try to do another Legend of Zelda cartoon? I know the first one was awful, but with how great and successful the new Super Mario movie was, I think they should get another shot. And then Johnny5 on Patreon responded, I think they should too. The new movie is going to be live action. Not too sure about that one. Yeah, I mean, it would make sense. I was actually shocked when they said that the Zelda movie was going to be live action, especially after how successful their partnership with Illumination was for the Mario movie. Now, Zelda, it would lend itself better to live action than the Mario franchise would. But like, does that mean that it is the right answer? I don't know how they're going to pull it off, making a Zelda live action movie. I think it would make more sense, honestly, to do it as a cartoon and even doing it as like a Netflix series. I'm just trying to think of how they're going to either adapt an existing Zelda story in the span of presumably 90 to 120 minutes, an hour and a half to 2 hours. How are they going to adapt a Zelda story that usually takes anywhere from like 25, 30 hours to, 70 hours into that short, tiny little span? That's always been the question for a lot of these video game adaptations, is how are they going to do it in a way that they can get through it in a reasonable amount of time for a movie or TV show. And I think TV is just easier for these sprawling, long-running adventures. Mario, that's a short enough and light enough on story franchise that they can do it, and it makes sense. And even then, it felt like they had to rush through certain elements to like get to the ultimate destination. Zelda, I think, would make more sense to get like the Last of Us treatment or the Fallout treatment, where they can really drill into these story elements. And even if it's a live action TV show, that would make more sense to me than a movie. But I guess they're playing the hot hand, right? Like they just blew up the box office last year with the Super Mario Brothers movie. So they're hoping to ride that. I'm hoping that, they are able to get a great cast that's not going to take us out of the experience. Because it's one thing if you hear Chris Pratt's voice coming out of Mario's mouth, right? Like that is something where they eventually I got to a point where I was like, okay, after I got past the initial shock of like, that's not Charles Martinet coming out of Mario's mouth, that's Chris Pratt. Once I got past that initial shock, by the end of that movie, That was what Mario sounded like in my head, at least in that medium. It's going to be hard to like say see Timothy Chalamet as Link and not always see Timothy Chalamet as I'm looking at a real character on the screen, a real human on the screen. No matter how much they dress him up in a green tunic and put like, the pointy ears, that is always going to be Timothy Chalamet's face. So how are they going to bridge that gap for these iconic heroes? And yes, I know Link always has different looks, different art styles. So like this could be just another art style that Link exists in, real like live action. Oh man, but that's going to be tough. A cartoon would probably be the safer bet, but Nintendo's never been known for the safe bets. So why not? Let's see what they can do with this live action. I think as long as Shigeru Miyamoto is continuing to be involved heavily on the creative side, it is going to have some mark of quality. He famously was not involved with that live action Mario movie, and then he was famously extremely involved with the cartoon Mario movie. And whether you think that story was extremely shallow or not, which it wasn't the most in-depth story, but it did what it needed to do. It was a fun Mario adventure that basically was an amusement park ride throughout the Mushroom Kingdom. And it's like, hey, look at this cool thing that exists in the Mushroom Kingdom. Look at this cool thing. If they can do that with Zelda, I think that they need to be a little bit less of a thrill ride and more like substance to it, but it's doable. And yes, a cartoon would probably be the better path, but I think live action, if they can, crack the code of how to make it so there's not this weird barrier of like not seeing a celebrity's face instead of seeing Link's face, that's going to be the biggest hurdle, I think. I think they're going to invest a ton of money into this, and they're going to probably, I mean, as long as they rely on Shigeru Miyamoto, they're going to make sure that it feels right. I don't think that they're going to put out a terrible product unless there's just no way to avoid it. Hopefully that's not the case. All right. Chain Whippin' over on Patreon says, this question was put out shortly after the Game Informer closure. They say, "Hey Brian, how are you doing? Thank you so much for asking. There are good days and bad days. I keep telling people when they ask about the Game Informer closure that the saddest part is obviously that I no longer have a job and I no longer get to do what I love on an everyday basis. I no longer get to travel to these events and, meet these developers and spend time with them and get to know them on a personal level the way I was able to with the Metaphor and Persona team, the way I have with several developers on Nintendo's side. I don't know if I'm going to be in a room with Shigeru Miyamoto and Koji Kondo and Eiji Aonuma anytime soon. Just given the fact that I'm my current thing is I'm a podcaster. I'm not a director at the largest gaming magazine on the planet, on the planet anymore. It's a different kind of paradigm shift. I no longer get access to games ahead of time. Thankfully, Nintendo was kind enough to provide me a code of Zelda Echoes of Wisdom on launch day. So big thanks to them for still wanting to support the show in that way. But it's a different type of vibe when it comes to like getting access for developers, and that's a really sad thing, not being able to have those experiences anymore. The extra layer of sadness is, I also don't get to work with these amazing people. The team that we had at Game Informer, really from 2015 when I joined all the way up to 2024 when we closed, it was a special group of people. Everybody that I worked with was incredible. I loved so many. I mean, all of them. They're just they really. People always say like, "Oh, we're like a family" when it comes to like their job, and it really did feel like a family. And like we had a big Game Informer reunion that we put together a few weeks ago, and it was amazing seeing them. It really felt like a family reunion, seeing all these folks from different eras of Game Informer. Andy McNamara flew in. It was great seeing him. A few other folks. Blake Hester flew in from New York. Maybe he drove. I think he may have driven. But either way, it was so awesome to see these folks. Even people from before my time at Game Informer were there, and it was so great to catch up with them. Spouses came. It really felt like a family get together. And I'm really grateful to be a part of that history. The added layer of sadness is that, like, my favorite magazine no longer exists. That's so just an added layer of sadness on top of that. And, in terms of how I'm doing overall, I think pretty good. I have good days and I have bad days, and like the bad days just are like, oh well, that sucks. I no longer have this job that I obsessed over getting for 6 years when I was trying to break in, and I had it for almost a decade. And that was fantastic, and it was a dream come true. And it's sad that it's gone, but I'm extremely grateful for it, the fact that it even happened. That dream doesn't come true for the vast majority of people, and the fact that it did come true for me, and I was able to join as an entry level editor back in 2015, even though I had those 6 years of experience. Like, that's just kind of like the way it works in games media, or it did work. I mean, it was a fantastic ride, and I'm sad that it's gone. And not having a steady job is scary sometimes. I haven't had insurance since the end of August, when my benefits ran out from Game Informer, and that's that's scary in America, not having insurance, and or health insurance, at least. I still have car insurance and rental insurance, but some days it does hit hard. Some days I do kind of, for lack of a better word, spiral. And that's the other thing that sucks about not having insurance is, I don't have the ability to really schedule my therapist anymore, because insurance is tied to employment here in the US. And that's a really inopportune thing when, like, you're going through this big life event and you no longer have insurance. So that's tricky as well. And therapy is extremely expensive if you don't have insurance in a lot of cases. But yeah, overall, I'm doing well. I'm hoping that I will get a full-time job, but I'm taking on a bunch of contract work. I'm taking on freelance stuff. You may have seen that I went to San Diego on behalf of GameSpot, um, and wrote about Tekken 8 and their new DLC, and Dragon Ball Sparking Zero, and then doing some other stuff on the side, consulting work with game studios, and writing some stuff for other folks. So I'm hanging in there. I'm keeping very busy, like maybe like busier than I was when I was working at Game Informer, which is wild because I never worked less than 40 hours at Game Informer. And I do want to thank the community at All Things Nintendo, and the Game Informer community, especially because, like, you all were so extremely kind and supportive when all of this went down, that, like, I could have gone to a very dark place, and I really appreciate the support. Whether you're just, like, either a Patreon supporter or just somebody who listens to the show day in, day out, or says something nice every once in a while on Twitter or Instagram or whatever, like, that means a lot. And I read all of those, and I appreciate so much all of those. So, thank you to everyone who is listening to this right now and has ever reached out with something kind to say, because that stuff really does help on those tough days, especially. But yeah, overall, nothing to worry about. I'm doing well overall. Life is unpredictable, but it's great. So thank you for asking, Chain Whippin'. Let's see. Let's find somebody who hasn't asked something yet. Zach Bencall via Patreon. I'm curious what some of your favorite what are some of your favorite subgenres in gaming? Subgenre here meaning not just action or RPG, which has elements that many games pull from, but more specifically things like Souls-like or character action that a whole game is built around. Oh man. I mean, is turn-based RPG, is that too specific? Because man, do I like a good turn-based RPG, whether it's Final Fantasy X or Persona or whatever. I really dig a good turn-based RPG. I'm glad that franchises like Metaphor and Persona and Pokemon are still carrying that turn-based torch, because we've seen Final Fantasy move away from it. We've seen these other kind of standard bearers of turn-based RPGs kind of get away from it. And I think that's probably my answer. Like, you look at my favorite games of all time, and it's like platform mascot, or I'm sorry, mascot platformers, um, character action games, if you want to count the Zelda franchise in that, and turn-based RPGs. A lot of those. For a while, it might have been hero shooters, but that was primarily buoyed by Overwatch. But I'm really excited for Marvel Rivals too. So hero shooters is big there. But even like the dumb phone game that I played, Marvel Strike Force, it is a predatory slot machine style game, but it's also at its core a turn-based RPG. So yeah, I think that's probably my answer. Turn-based RPG. Um, let's see. Zechariah Rogers over on Patreon says, maybe not gaming related necessarily, but what kind of collectibles, swag, or merch do you like to see from games that you like? Are there any games you wish had more merchandise? I bought the Unicorn Overlord Collector's Edition, and it came with a really cool card game. Personally, I like figures, but most of my collection is Funko Pop with some figures from games I really like, such as Fire Emblem, Hades, and Fallout. I'm a big fan of like premium statues. I don't buy a whole lot of them, but like the Sonic X Shadow Generations one, I see that and I'm just like, it hurts not to have that one. But yeah, like looking over at my display case, which is just out of view here, maybe I'll like put in a quick pan of my display case for the video version here. But looking over at my display case, it's a lot of amiibo figures, so it's cool to see that. I love like a good statue or a good figure, um, an item from the game. Like I have like the Ocarina of Time, I have the Wind Waker, I have like Joker's mask from Persona, um, something like that. I got into a thing when I at the tail end of my time at Game Informer where I started. I mean, actually, no, that's one that I would get pictures with the developers, and I love having those pictures with the developers. That was something that was really cool. Like, I have this picture of me with Shigeru Miyamoto and Koji Kondo. I have me with the developers behind Final Fantasy VII Rebirth. So like, yeah, all of those were really great. I mean, that's not really swag or collectibles. I like a really cool T-shirt. Um, yeah, those are the big ones for me, I think. I really, really love. I would always get like Japanese versions of my favorite games when I would go over to Japan. That was kind of like became a tradition where I would find like one of my favorite games of all time, at least one of them. I mean, some trips I came home with like five or six, but I would find one of my favorite games of all time and get it in the Japanese form. Because especially in the 90s, 80s, and 90s, the box arts were so drastically different that I like having them in my display case. So I have like Super Mario World, I have Mario 64, I have Final Fantasy 10, I have Ocarina of Time. That was the first one that I did. I have Street Fighter 2 Turbo. So yeah, those are like the ones that I love having. But in terms of like swag, it's like statues. I like a good art book, um, and t-shirts. Yeah, those are the big ones. In terms of franchises, I wish had more. It's kind of rectifying itself, but it used to be Persona 5, but now there's a ton of Persona 5 merch. Um, Sonic has a ton of merch. Final Fantasy is starting to get more merch as well. Man, it's hard to really find one that I love that has not like it hasn't dove like head first into the merchandising side of things. Street Fighter still has a ton of merch. It would have been Overwatch before, but Overwatch has also dove into that. Maybe Final Fantasy X specifically, if we want to zoom in, because like they put out these really premium figures, but they're like $140 a piece. And it's like, I really want that Titus and I really want that Yuna statue. I have the Auron one that I got. There was some promotion that they had on eBay where I was like, okay, well, I could get like $50 off of something. And I chose to splurge on an Auron figure. And of course, he arrived with a broken arm, but I'm like, all right, whatever. I can just put his arm like that. And it as long as nobody touches it, it stays on. But Final Fantasy X, it would be cool if they did more merchandising with that. Um, let's see what other questions we have. Let's scroll down to the bottom here. Mike Stagg, aka at Bulbasaur1871 on Twitter. Mike says, "Do you think Nintendo will ever have a comparable console to the rest in terms of high performance and graphic capability?" Not anytime soon. I don't think. I think that starting with the GameCube, Nintendo made a conscious decision to not do the arms race thing. I think they decided that, like, yes, we can do something that's comparable in the sense that it's in the same ballpark. But I don't think that they're worried tremendously about the graphics. The big thing that comes back to bite them in terms of graphics is the fact that you can't port a lot of the third-party games over and have it be as good of an experience as you'd like it to be. Again, look no further than something like Mortal Kombat 1 or even something like Marvel's Midnight Suns, which was announced for Switch and then it was canceled because presumably they decided that like it wouldn't be worth it to try and make it so this game could run on Switch. That's the downside. But other than that, like as long as they have something that's technically competent, there's really no reason to get into an arms race and make it so that they, jack up the price of their consoles because they should focus more on making the Switch experience more, I guess, more seamless, more perfect. Because right now it already works like magic, right? Like the ability to just be playing a game on your TV and just walk up to your thing and not have to like hit any buttons that say like I'm going to switch to docked mode now or I'm going to switch to handheld mode now. You just plug it in or you pull it out of the dock and it automatically does it, right? Type of it's not some type of like process. That the fact that they figured that out on the first iteration is pretty magical. I think if they double down on that, make it a more powerful system, make it, but not so powerful that it's like a Steam Deck or a PS5. That would be amazing if they could figure out some way to make that happen. That's really what I think they need to focus on. Maybe some point in the future, if the magic of the hybrid console fades away, maybe then they'll do it. But like, what games of theirs really need to be ultra powerful to run? Like a 3D Mario game, you can run Mario Odyssey just fine on a Switch. Maybe they want to do more stuff with the Zelda franchise, make it so like they can do some more impressive stuff. But they've always showed that they have ways around that, right? Like they just do like a cool art style that is not that's not going to be incredibly graphically powerful. Like the fact that they were able to do Tears of the Kingdom on Switch, I've heard from several developers. It's just nothing short of developer wizardry. And if they can continue doing that, then they don't really need to get into these arms races with Sony or Microsoft. So yeah, I don't see in the foreseeable future, but I'm not gonna say never. Let's see. Groffles over on the Discord. What other Nintendo franchise besides Mario could successfully move to an action adventure open world formula like Zelda did with Breath of the Wild and Tears of the Kingdom? And then Leafeon over on Discord also said, I think if Nintendo tried to do it again with Star Fox, it would be so much better. World and level design wise, it could basically be like Jedi Survivor with a lot more space battle segments. So basically Kingdom Hearts. I actually agree with Leafeon on that one. Star Fox needs something to happen with it. It is this beloved franchise that Nintendo has completely kind of left for dead after Star Fox Zero failed. And I think that there's something cool that they could do with it. Like, make it a lot of space battles, but then let us land and go run around. I think that, what was the pitch that I brought up probably last year at this point, that Retro Studios had a pitch for like a mercenary based kind of open galaxy Star Fox game, I think that would be phenomenal if they could figure out a way to do that and like make it so you can just fly around to different planets. Maybe not as like intricate or systems heavy as something like Starfield, but like doing something like that where you can fly around to different planets, you get into space battles along the way, and then you can land on those planets and you can either like go out on your tank or go in your submarine or fly around in the atmosphere in your R-Wing, or get out and like do like, ground missions. Like that would be a really cool way to transition there. So yeah, I'm 100% with Leafeon in that. Oh man, what are some of the franchises I'm not thinking of here? Metroid could be a cool one. Man, yeah, Metroid, like a big open area Metroidvania would be really awesome. But I think that maybe Kirby would be a good one. But yeah, I really do think that Star Fox is probably the answer here. Um, okay, there was one here that I wanted to bring up. Okay, so this comes from Chaps My Ass over on Patreon. Are you more Metroid or more Vania? What's your favorite Metroidvania? Have you completed your playthrough of Super Metroid yet? No, I've not completed my playthrough of Super Metroid. No, I started Minish Cap instead. But yeah, you're right. I should play Super Metroid. I really should. Favorite Metroidvania? Does Dead Cells count? Kind of, maybe. It's more of a roguelike than a Metroidvania, but it borrows so many tenets from Metroidvania. I'm definitely more Metroid than Vania, I think. Like, I love Metroid Zero Mission. That might be my favorite Metroidvania. Let me search here just to make sure I'm not forgetting any. Sundered, I really love. I loved Blasphemous 2. Ori and the Blind Forest is very good. Several of the Metroid games. Prince of Persia: The Lost Crown, what I've played of it is pretty awesome. But yeah, I think those are some of my picks. Blasphemous 2 really sunk its hooks in me. So I think that is that's probably my answers. Blasphemous 2, but maybe Metroid Zero Mission, maybe if Dead Cells counts, it's 100% Dead Cells. We'll go with that. Jason over on Facebook. I don't even go on Facebook. I don't even know how I got this. Why has the release of games slowed down on the Switch Online library? So many more classic games, for example, have been out before on Virtual Console are unavailable. Rather than releasing 3 Super Mario Advance games, can we have a release of 1 game for each console? It feels like the NES has been forgotten. I'm assuming that this is one of the answers that I pulled from the Game Informer feedback questions, because I don't know if people know this. If you ever opened a Game Informer magazine and you saw the replies section where people would write in questions to the editors, and then an anonymous editor would answer it, that was me for the last few years. So I was the one that was grabbing all those answers and responding to them. So I may have thrown that on here because it was relevant to this. So I'll do that from time to time, since we didn't get to ever answer these questions before we were shut down. But yeah, I mean the simple answer is they've done a lot of the biggest heavy hitters on NES, SNES, and N64. A lot of those the most beloved games that they're able to license anyway. Like it would be tough for them to put out like a sports game, for example, because they have to license the old players and everything on there. So I don't think we're going to get like triple play gold edition on the Sega Genesis, or we're not going to get like maybe Tony Hawk's Pro Skater would be one that we could get on like the N64 catalog, but I just don't see that happening. We already have Tony Hawk's Pro Skater 1 and 2 on Switch anyway, but I think that they've done a lot of the heaviest hitters on the Nintendo Switch Online, and we're seeing some of these games like the F-Zero game that just arrived on the Game Boy Advance library. games that never came to the West are now making their jump over. And, that is something that is what these things should be used for. It should be exposing people to the lesser known games. We're getting a lot of games that were previously only in Japan. And I think that's awesome. But yeah, there are some games that we're missing that were on the virtual console that it would be great if we could see them come over. And I can't think of like any immediate ones off the top of my head that like feel like blatant missing aside from like the Pokemon games on the Game Boy libraries. And yeah, those are the ones that really stick out like sore thumbs for me. The Pokemon ones. But the reason they've slowed down is like, I think that they're probably readying to transition to the Switch 2. I think that they've released most of the heavy hitters. And I think that some of them are licensing at this point. Like we might not get like some of the older Square Enix games because maybe there's some licensing issues, or maybe Square Enix wants to release it as like a legacy catalog instead of Nintendo Switch Online. I'm surprised Pokemon hasn't done that. Like, if we're not going to get them on Switch Online, why are we not getting the Pokemon games on Game Boy, Game Boy Color, Game Boy Advance? Like, I would pay, $60 to have all of the Game Boy, Game Boy Color, Game Boy Advance Pokemon games on Switch, but for whatever reason, they're just not doing it. And like, if they're not going to do that, at least give it to us on Switch Online. And I don't know why they're not. It's really frustrating, to be honest. And yeah, that's actually Douglas on Facebook's question. Why haven't all Pokemon and Legend of Zelda titles been ported to Switch with speed multipliers and save states, Emerald, X and Y, Black and White, Heart Gold, Soul Silver, Gale of Darkness, Conquest, and A Link Between Worlds, for example? Yeah. I mean, A Link Between Worlds might be a different one because it is, there are I believe there are second screen elements that they would have to adapt. But yeah, the rest of those are prime candidates for Switch Online and or just a standalone entry. Like, why shouldn't we have some ability to play these games? And there's no way to really get them. I mean, you can't get them on the 3DS eShop anymore. It's shut down. And finding a physical copy of A Link Between Worlds, how much does that even cost now? I mean, I have a digital copy already. Let's type in Link Between Worlds eBay. Okay, it's not outrageous. So it's like looking like you're expected to pay like $27 for a used copy. Actually, this is a brand new copy. All right, so it's not terrible to get that, but a lot of the older Zelda games are pretty expensive. So it's kind of frustrating to not have that be readily accessible. And the Pokemon thing, I just kind of went on my rant for that, but the fact that we can't play the vast majority of Pokemon games on Switch is absurd. Like, what are they waiting for? What's the reason for not giving us those games? It just doesn't make any sense. God Amongst Apes on Twitter. Tomodachi Life for Switch when? Please, I need this. You and me both. You and me both. I love Tomodachi Life. That is maybe, outside of A Link Between Worlds, that might be my most wanted Switch port from the 3DS anyway. Like, man, Tomodachi Life, I got into so many weird hijinks with like the most random assortment of Miis that would come to my island. It was kind of the thing that like eased me into Animal Crossing. Like when Animal Crossing New Leaf was on 3DS, I didn't get into it. Tomodachi Life was what got me into that style of gameplay. And then when Animal Crossing New Horizons came out, that was when I was like, oh, okay, it's like Tomodachi Life, but not as zany. But there is some zaniness still in Animal Crossing. But yes, I want either a new Tomodachi Life or just port the original Tomodachi Life. We got some of the other Me-based games over on, what was it? Miitopia was one of them that we got. Why not Tomodachi Life? I guess maybe because like I think there was like a Street Pass element to that, but we could do it without that. Spartan Rob asks on Twitter, when will we ever get more Star Fox? Touched on this a little bit already. Star Fox is a franchise that shouldn't be this difficult for them to figure out how to do it. And the fact that they haven't figured it out is a little concerning to me, seeing as how Nintendo has always figured out how to make it work with a lot of their franchises, right? We lost Metroid for quite a while there, and I think that's largely because Gunpei Yokoi was either no longer with Nintendo, and unfortunately he passed away, and he was a big advocate of that franchise. I mean, we have Dylan Cuthbert, who is, he's still around, he's still working in games. Why not make it so that what is he up to? I think he's working over at Q Games. Okay, yeah. So, he is still active in the game development community. He Why not? Miyamoto is he was the creator of Star Fox. I think that he may have taken the failure of Star Fox Zero a little personally. Shigeru Miyamoto, I mean. And the reason I say that is because I think at one point we asked Miyamoto, it might have been Ben Hansen that asked him, what's the most underrated, I think he said Wii U game. It wasn't Nintendo game in general. I think he said, what's the most underrated Wii U game? And I think Miyamoto said Star Fox Zero. And I think that he has taken that failure to heart. The fact that it wasn't successful, it wasn't well received. And I think that he made it so that, like, I mean, he didn't make it so he I think realized that it might be an uphill battle reviving this franchise, and it is. Don't get me wrong. I would love to see more Star Fox. I think that would be a great year one or year two Switch title if they can figure out a way to go back to basics while still expanding on that formula. Like, bring us back. I recently played a good chunk of Star Fox 64 on my Switch, and it is like, it's an amazing game still to this day, and I would love to make it. Love to have a new Star Fox game on there. I just don't know how they're going to do it. Let's see here. Here's from Nobby Buckles, aka Dave, via Patreon. He says, I'm pretty sure you've answered a version of this question before, but I'm curious how it's changed over the years. With playing games being a large part of your job, do you ever feel like you can't just put in a game and unwind? Playing relaxing games is critical for me to manage my mental health. So I hope it can still be a positive factor for you in your life. If not, what are your go-to decompression activities when you're stressed? Yeah, it can be challenging. I mean, even though I'm no longer, technically full-time employed with the games industry, I still have this podcast. I still have All Things Gamers. I still do consulting work. I still keep my finger on the pulse of the industry. So, yes, I still have gaming as my number one hobby, but it can bleed in, right? Like, it can be like I'll be playing a game to unwind and I'll be like, "Oh, how can I monetize my hobby right now?" It's like, how can I write an article about this, or how can I do an episode about this? And that can be a little frustrating that my brain kind of works like that when all I really want to do is just sit and unwind. But, you know, I still love it. I still love playing through games. Like, even when I'm marathoning something like a Persona 5 Royal or a Persona 3 Reload, something super long that I want to get through and publish a review. Or when I was playing Tears of the Kingdom and getting through it before launch, I still loved it. It was like I woke up in the morning and knew that, it was my responsibility to get through this game. And I always looked forward to it. Now, obviously, there are games that I reviewed that I was not a fan of. Um, and those days where I had to get up and play those games were not like ones that I really looked forward to. But at the end of the day, being able to still enjoy this hobby that I have spent so much of my life covering, I've spent 16 years writing about games at this point, and I still have it as my top hobby. And it's still something where it's like, okay, well, as long as I have a game that I'm like interested in pouring time into, if I have a weekend where I'm not doing anything, like, yeah, I like getting out of the house, going for a hike, going and like just kind of walking around somewhere, like walking around a downtown area, or if it's cold outside in Minnesota, going to a mall. Um, Getting out of the house is a big thing for me for my mental health. But yeah, like, if I have a Saturday where there's just nothing to do and like it's like, not great weather or whatever, I will relish in being able to sit down and play through a long, sprawling game. That's something that I adore doing. And yeah, but when I'm not doing that, like I said, I like going for hikes. I like exercising. Um, Going for runs clears my mind so much. If I need to like break through something like something emotional that's like kind of like holding me back, I will do a boxing workout in my garage. I build a gym in my garage, and I'll do a boxing workout, a boxing into hit. Um, so those are like crucial for me as well. But yeah, like I'll watch movies, I'll watch TV shows, I'll just uh, just kind of zone out, do something that doesn't require my brain to really be into overdrive like sometimes gaming does. But yeah, to answer your question, Dave, it is still a top tier hobby for me. Um, Maybe do another 15 minutes of this before we wrap up this episode. Um, Paul, aka Drunk on Mako, on the community Discord says, "What's a game that is still only tied to handheld consoles, aka Game Boy, Game Boy Color, Game Boy Advance, that you'd like to see given new life on Switch or Switch 2?" I mean, I kind of already answered that. Link Between Worlds would probably be my top pick. Tomodachi Life, Rhythm Heaven would be a franchise that I'd love to see make the leap over. All the Pokemon games, the Sonic Advance series. I would love to finally have an excuse to play those. Everybody tells me that like that first Sonic Advance in particular is phenomenal, and if you like the classic Sonic games like I do, you should definitely check those out. So that is one that I would love to. I'd love to have an opportunity to do that. All right, so Brendan H. Roberts over on Spotify has been doing a countdown or a count up of how many episodes I go without saying a certain game is my favorite platformer of all time. So here's what Brendan H. Roberts on Spotify says: "Let's give it up for episode number 6 with no mention of Super Mario World, aka Brian's favorite platformer of all time." Does that count? Does that reset the timer? I don't know. I mean, you're the arbiter of rules here, so maybe that resets the timer. I just wanted to read your comment. But yeah, it's fun. Every week I get a mention that I have not mentioned Super Mario World being my favorite platformer of all time. But we will restart the countdown or the clock there, I guess. 0 days without incident. Cassie over on Facebook says, "Will they ever add some sort of trophy/achievement system?" I think they might. They're kind of experimenting with it a little bit in the past. Shigeru Miyamoto has not wanted to do it, saying that like he wants to find the fun within the games themselves. But Nintendo has been experimenting a little bit with it in terms of making it so that they are like if you get like those Nintendo like the icons for Nintendo Switch Online where you can make like your own like custom icon. There are now things where it's like you need to play this game and that'll unlock these icons that you can get. And certain other games have them built in to the system, to the experience, but like I could see the Switch 2 or maybe the console after the Switch 2 adding a trophy or achievement system of some kind or something approximating one. I don't think it's the most likely thing, but yeah, I think that is the case for what we're going to get with the like some theoretical trophy system. Something we talked about it here. Altair Kienu, sorry if I mispronounced that, over on Twitter said, "I don't know if it's a Nintendo thing or a Japanese developer thing, but every time the fans ask for a new F-Zero or a new Dead IP, they usually respond with, 'But what can we do? What can we do new for those games? Not enough to update graphics. It has to be a new mechanic to be a new game,' is what Altair Kionu says over on Twitter. I think it's more of a Nintendo thing. We've seen, although it is kind of like a Final Fantasy does it too. Well, excuse me, got a hair in my mouth. Final Fantasy does it as well, where it has to be like kind of a different type of gimmick. Even Final Fantasy 10-2 or 13-2 or Lightning Returns, all the direct sequels all had to like have completely different gameplay. Sonic has kind of been like guilty of that as well. Mario is very much that way. So it might be part, Japanese developer thinking, but I think that Nintendo is the biggest ones, right? Like Nintendo has always thought this way, whether it be for their hardware or their software. Um, they want to always do something new. We've seen that. Like the last time we just got like a straight power upgrade was the NES to the Super NES. After that it was to the N64, which I mean, I guess you could say that was a straight power upgrade, but it also added analog control. It added, it was the big leap into 3D. Then actually now GameCube was a power step up more or less, but then we got the Wii, which led into the Wii U, which was a completely different gimmick from the systems before, and then the Wii U led directly into the Switch, which is again a different gimmick. If we end up just going from the Switch to the Switch 2 and it's just a more powerful Switch with maybe some other small gimmicks that aren't like the centerpiece, that would be the first time in several generations they've done that. And I think that it's something that Nintendo always wants to do. They always want to do something where they are providing a new take on something that they've done before. They don't just want to do Star Fox 64 2. They want to do Star Fox Adventures. They want to do hand off Star Fox Assault to, was it Bandai Namco that did that? They wanted to do something completely different from Star Fox 64, which didn't end up working out. And then Star Fox Zero had to have that second screen experience, even though they tried to kind of recapture what they did with Star Fox 64 in the level design and everything. But I do think that there is a way that they could do F-Zero, and that also gets to Ian over on Facebook, who says, not only do we need a new F-Zero game, Captain Falcon deserves his own spin-off title where he goes around Mute City fighting crime. Yeah, that would be cool. I think that would be a good way to do that, like new twist on a tried and true genre, or a tried and true franchise. I'm sorry. That would be something that they could do to branch out the F-Zero franchise, but who knows? Like Nintendo, I think if they did like a really robust F-Zero style game where it's just a real tight emphasis on speed, the way they aren't able to really do with Mario Kart, it could be really awesome, and it would be a good showpiece for the Switch 2 if it's able to handle that. All right, so we're getting down to the end of this episode here. What else do we have? Okay. So this comes to us from Philly Yeet Steak on Patreon. I work with kids, and most of them play video games. The thing that worries me, however, is most of them exclusively play free-to-play games like Fortnite and Roblox. With this seemingly being the norm for a generation, I worry about how the industry will adapt. Am I worrying too much about this? No, I mean, I don't think you're necessarily worrying too much about it. I think that it is somewhat worrisome, right? Like these games that, players can sink hundreds or even thousands of hours into and never try something else. I mean, I bet that like, something like Steve from Minecraft or a lot of the characters from Fortnite are more recognizable from Fortnite than they are from like these other games they come from, to a good segment of the gaming population, particularly the younger demographic. I worry that, just as like gaming used to be seen as something for kids, and then when all those kids who were raised on gaming, like maybe you, definitely me, grew up and still loved that hobby, those franchises like Mario and Zelda continued to be a big thing. Um, I think that if these kids continue to just only play games like Fortnite and Roblox and never branch out, then yeah, maybe the industry could be in trouble as the older generation starts to either stop playing games or start to age out of some of these games. But that's the onus that goes on the developer, right? Like they have to figure out a way to attract this new generation of gamers over. And I mean, I think Nintendo does a great job of that. Like I still see kids out in the wild with their Switches playing Mario, with their Switches playing Animal Crossing, Mario Kart, all those franchises I see in the wild pretty frequently. Um, and yeah, I mean, maybe in the distant future, it could be a problem, especially with the way some of these games are a little predatory with their monetization. But yeah, I don't necessarily if it's like red alert just yet, but yeah, it could be a trend to keep our eyes on. Let's get a couple more here. James D over on Discord. I've been really enjoying a number of current and last gen ports on the Switch, such as Nier Automata, Red Dead Redemption, and more. While I could play those on my PS5, it's so nice to have them on a handheld. Do you think that Nintendo will make it more of a focus to bring ports and AAA third party releases to the Switch too? And then Calamity Nolan responds, I know you were asking for the pod, but for me, it's Zelda Triforce Heroes. I think a raid based online multiplayer game would do a lot better in a post Destiny world. Um, I think that and by the way, I completely mistied those responses. Calamity Nolan was responding to the which game stuck on a handheld. Sorry about that. I was like, wait a sec. When I read that, it didn't quite make sense. But yes, that the Triforce Heroes might get a new life on something like online multiplayer. But yeah, James D was asking specifically about will Nintendo make it more of a focus to bring ports and AAA third-party releases to Switch 2? Sorry about that. I don't know if it's going to be more of an emphasis, but with Switch 2, seemingly going to update the technology, the processing power, the graphics capabilities. It would be great to see some of these games that like have come out on other consoles and we're like, why isn't that on Switch? Like, why isn't Metaphor Refantasio coming to Switch? It's still kind of the same engine as Persona 5. We just got Persona 5 Royal on Switch. Why isn't Metaphor coming to Switch? There must be some reason. Why didn't Mass Effect Legendary Edition come to Switch? There's got to be some reason for it. Why wouldn't these developers want to put their games on the most popular platform by a mile? And the answer is probably it's challenging to create a version of these games that is toned down enough to handle or to be on the Switch. And I think that that's going to continue being an emphasis because, as you mentioned, like Nintendo has put a decent amount of third-party AAA titles on Switch. And if it is going to be something that is more and more regular, or it's going to be less parity between these consoles, why wouldn't these developers want to be in there? Yeah, I think that's going to be continuing to be a trend. Nintendo 101 on Discord says, this may sound weird and hopefully you get it. What is a game that fully brings you in, even environmentally? For example, playing Super Metroid or Metroid Dread in a cold, dark room with a decent surround sound really brings the game to life. It becomes almost eerie. I find that environmental situations elevate games and make them more memorable. I would agree with you. I mean, the one that I've mentioned before on this podcast is I was playing Star Fox 64 in the middle of really heavy turbulence on a flight one time, and it was the most intense gaming experience of my life. That's kind of an extreme example, but it's like a full body rumble pack in that case. But yeah, even like something like I've been playing a few games, and I've recently installed in my TV the Nanoleaf 4D lights that you put on the back of your television, and then you have a camera that points down at the screen and it mirrors kind of loosely the colors that are being shown on your screen. So like if there's like a red thing happening up in this corner and there's a blue thing happening on this half of the screen, like it'll be red behind the TV and then blue behind the TV over here. And that's really cool because it adds that extra level of immersion and like intensity in those scenes. So yeah, I'm right there with you. I think that that makes sense. Playing, I mean, especially playing like a survival horror game in a dark room. Like, I am very much looking forward to playing Until Dawn this Halloween season, in a dark room in probably in this basement at night. Like, I am so in for that experience. But yeah, Metroid in a dark room is also nearly unrivaled. Um, let's see. Let's wrap up one more here. This must be an older question. Why don't you ever talk about the essential Nintendo game, Superman 64? That is from Zachary Pliggy on Twitter. And as you may have known, I had Zachary Pliggy on to do an episode geared towards Superman 64. So go check that out if you have not heard that already. Quick hit here. Matthew Pirtle over on Twitter said, "Are we ever going to get an updated Duck Hunt? That was the best." I'm actually shocked that there's not like at least Duck Hunt like eShop games. Like, I mean, official Duck Hunt eShop. I'm sure there are like kind of light gun style shooters using the Joy Cons, but like the Joy Cons are motion control. The Wii, did we ever get a Duck Hunt game on Wii? I don't think we did. Like, I don't think we ever got another Duck Hunt game, did we? Duck Hunt was released on Virtual Console for the Wii U. How did we never get a Duck Hunt for the Wii? That's kind of wild. But, I was like, it almost was like I had to be like, I had to second guess myself. Like, did we get a Duck Hunt game on Wii? Because it's such an obvious fit. Z-Rock Well D on Instagram. So when does the Super Switch come out? It's been 6 years now. I agree. We're probably going to be hearing about Switch 2 very soon. I don't know if Super Switch is the name, but that's probably the likeliest contender if I had to guess. But yeah, I think Switch 2 is the best name. But we never got that Switch Pro that people kept saying, "Oh, it's happening." And that's why I didn't buy a Switch OLED, because I was waiting for that Switch Pro. We're trying to end here. Alex on Facebook said, "Why is Nintendo re-releasing GBA ports of games that are inferior to games they already released on the exact same subscription platform? Like, just give us Pokemon Ruby, Sapphire, and Emerald and we'll shut up." I've ranted about that enough this episode. I agree. I mean, let's see. Okay, we'll end on this. Zallo Trails on Instagram says, "Has there been any concern that creating games on a console that is very limited in hardware compared with current gens will also limit the imagination for game makers? My fear is that ideas would get removed or repurposed just because the Switch can't execute them. It seems that when it comes to hardware specs, Nintendo is always far behind." I think that if anything, it actually makes the creators more inventive. We've seen them have to like create these things that they had to work around. That said, yeah, there have been times. What was the example where? Oh man, who was I talking to? It was either Takashi Tezuka or Eiji Aonuma, who said something along the lines of like, "We had this idea and it wasn't technologically available, so we kind of shelved it, and then we brought it back on the Switch because we could finally do it." I forget what the example they gave was. But yeah, they are constantly trying to do things, and sometimes it's not really able to be done, but other times it is. And that's something that they have worked around pretty much the entirety of their existence at Nintendo, is like, how can we do this with the technology that we have? And then they shelve something that God, it's really bothering me what it was. It also might have been, oh my God, it was some interview that I did through a interpreter in the last year. So it was, it was either Shigeru Miyamoto, Eiji Aonuma, or the Final Fantasy VII Rebirth team, because I can't think about what it was. Some gimmick that they wanted to do and they had to shelve it. But honestly, I think that it is something that encourages innovation more so than discourages. But yes, there's going to be downsides of that as well. Surely there are several things that Nintendo has wanted to do and they just haven't been able to, because, I mean, Pokemon Scarlet and Violet could be a prime example of a game that a developer wanted to do but couldn't because of the Switch. And then you fast forward and it's like, oh, they're doing it anyway, even though they can't do it. So yeah, I think that ultimately, it encourages them to be more creative so that they can take advantage of it. But yes, it would be great if they could achieve all their dreams in game design because they have the technology to support them. But let's call it there. My mouth is tired from yapping so much. Thank you for traveling with me to Yap City during this episode of All Things Nintendo. But before we wrap up, I did want to give folks who are not $10 patrons a glimpse of what's happening on the other side of the fence. Over on All Things Gamers this week, it was another solo episode. So if you didn't get enough of just me talking to you, this week's episode of All Things Gamers wasn't a Q&A episode, but it was kind of like a quick hit buffet. First, I celebrated the 25th anniversary of the Tony Hawk's Pro Skater franchise the only way I know how, by talking about its making of. We also may have listened to one of my favorite songs off that soundtrack. On top of that, I gave my hands-on impressions of The Alters, Sonic X Shadow Generations, and Tekken 8's new DLC. And then I ended the show by sharing a conversation that I had with the producer of Dragon Ball Sparking Zero. You can also, speaking of Sonic X Shadow Generations hands-on, on my Medium page, I published an in-depth hands-on preview, which I think is serving as kind of like the final preview before Sonic X Shadow Generations comes out. So go check that out. I will link to it in the show description. And again, if you have missed out to this point, you can find my second weekly podcast, All Things Gamers, under the $10 tier of the All Things Nintendo Patreon. And I do want to close out by saying that about a month ago, I put out a call to my patrons to provide feedback to the paid tiers. I never formally addressed the feedback, but know that I did read all of it. And when the next phase of the show and the Patreon page does arrive, I'm kind of ruminating and ideating how I can take things to the next level here. I will be taking into account those suggestions. So thank you so much for the feedback. A lot of great answers there. And I have ideas of ways that we can, take this show to the next level. But in the meantime, thank you so much to everyone for listening. Please, if you haven't already, throw All Things Nintendo a 5-star review and hit that subscribe button. If you want more All Things Nintendo content, you can join the Patreon tier. That and the associated Discord server are the best ways to get any questions or comments in for episodes such as this one. But you can also reach out, Brian at allthingsnintendo.com, or hit me up on social media at Brian P. Shea. Also, be sure to find me on YouTube and subscribe to that channel. You can either search for All Things Nintendo and find the most recent update or most recent episode, or visit at Brian P. Shea on YouTube. But for now, that is our show for this week. Thank you again for listening. Take care. We'll see you next time. Before we wrap up this show, I just want to give a special shout out to the $10 patrons of the All Things Nintendo podcast. Aaron Smith, Abdullah, Elena R., Alex Stadnick, Andy Junkins, Ben Richland, Brooke Obscura, Chaps My Ass, Chris Callie, Colton Bredlau, Dan Norman, Derek Sigmund, Dusty Beeman, Ian T. Clark, Jackal, Jacob Naheen, Jason Thompson, Jawar Hello, Jill Grote, Johnny Five, Jordan Sloat, Jose Villalobos, Joseph Jury, Justin Childress, Cody Gibson, Lindsay Hartz, Marshall Thompson, Megan S., Michael Anderson, Nintendo 101, Pat Roberts, Paul at Drunk on Mako, Pratable, Rob McCann, Bobby Mac 265, Roger Reichert, Russell Sayer, Scott Matthews, Smithy Poo, Tux DC, Wham Bam Sam the Gaming Man, Zach Marcus, and Zachary Pliggy. Your support means so indescribably much to me. It honestly, like, this is why I'm able to continue doing this show. I love having this community, and thank you for being a part of it. Thank you for supporting the show, and thank you for continuing to listen to the All Things Nintendo podcast.